Good afternoon. Glad to be here. And today we'll be talking about disability networks across Africa. And I can see Shoaib making his way on the stage. We're going to have both a physical and a virtual session whereby we're going to discuss the importance. Welcome, Shoaib. Good afternoon. My name is Luke Muleka, and I'm wearing a striped navy blue suit, black shoes with, I think, yellow dotted tie, and wearing rimless specs for purposes of introduction. I'll let my colleague introduce himself.
My name is Shoaib Choklan. I'm the Executive Director of African Disability Forum. We're a continental-wide organization, membership-based, and we have members in 45 countries, and our headquarters is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I'm a wheelchair user.
Thank you very much. And if there are my other panelists online, they can introduce themselves, then we proceed.
Hi everyone. Very good afternoon to all the attendees present today. I'm Sri Lakshmi Subramaniam. I am an Indian female with black hair in my mid-30s. I am the program lead for the Ethiopian Business and Disability Network, EBDN. The EBDN was started by the ILO in Ethiopia in partnership with the Ethiopian Center for Disability and Development, ECDD, which is a non-profit that works collaboratively with other organizations to promote disability-inclusive development in Ethiopia. Using my experience in corporate social responsibility in CSR, I'm constantly trying to engage with the private sector to include persons with disabilities in their diversity and inclusion and their CSR programs. The EBDN currently has over 40 companies as their network members, and we're currently implementing projects with the ILO Ethiopia and Life for the Good. I'm really excited to be a part of this session, and I hope to connect with you all a bit later.
Thank you very much. And is Simon online? Simon, please introduce yourself.
Yep, I'm here, Luke. Yep. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Simon Brown. I'm the Deputy Technical Director of Economic Empowerment at Sightsavers, actually in the UK, not the USA, where I'm at another conference today. Very passionate about business and disability networks and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seated here in my capacity, I'm the Vice Chair of Kenya Business Disability Network. Is an organization or a conglomerate of employers in the space of persons with disabilities. And this is an initiative by ILO where we are trying to see, or it's trying to be established, how can corporates and employers ensure that the workspaces, the workforce, and the products and services are inclusive for persons with disability. Because it's through those initiatives of inclusivity that we are able to get a holistic approach in terms of where we're working, the spaces, and also the products and services. And as you know that some of these groundbreaking innovations like smartphones, lifts, some of them have actually been inspired by the creators, the innovators trying to solve problems around accessibility, especially persons with disabilities. I would like to take this opportunity now to have my panel just to speak, and I'll go with the Ethiopian Business Disability Network. What is the importance of business collaboration? Maybe if you can just take us through that, then we can now move to the next, have the discussion moving.
Sure. I think what we've done with the EBDN, just to give you an example of how a business collaboration is really important, is that is the only way that we can actually provide meaningful employment to persons with disabilities in Africa. So what is happening, majority in Ethiopia, majorly, is that most persons with disabilities are under the age of, in the youth age, so mostly under the age of 25. And so most of them lack skills which can help them get a job. But even if there are youth with disabilities who do have the skills, they don't know where to actually apply because most of the job portals are not inclusive. So most of the time, due to stigma and discrimination, which is quite rampant, not just in Ethiopia, but also I think in Africa, what happens is when a person with disability applies for a certain job, most of the time the employer doesn't know this person has a disability. And then what's happening is you're seeing a lot of them facing rejections. So what really the EBDN does is to work collaboratively with the private sector. We also provide awareness sessions, and that's something that really helps the private sector to be mentally prepared to what to accept, to what to expect when they're hiring someone with a disability. And this collaboration is really important so that there's no scope for rejections because the employer is already prepared. The job seeker also knows that he is applying for a workplace that's inclusive. So it's a win-win situation for both. And without collaboration, you hardly see that success of, a person with disability actually landing a job. Now, there are, of course, there are exceptions everywhere. Highly skilled persons with disabilities, irrespectively, will get a job anywhere. But we're trying to figure out what do we do with the majority, the mass of job seekers with disabilities who are not very skilled. When I say very skilled, I mean who have a master's or even majority of them don't even have a degree. And so we're trying to place them into the workforce, which is a real challenge. So yeah, I think collaboration is really, really important with the private sector.
Thank you very much. And I want to bring the discussion back here and talk to Schweib. And what is your take on the issue of sharing best practices, especially in the disability inclusion? And as I was speaking on my introduction, I said that it's very important to have it at workspace, workforce, and also products and services.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question because it's been on my mind very much from the first session that I attended coming here on Monday. People were talking about reasonable accommodation, soft skills, preparing people with disabilities for the workplace and so on. All these things may have been covered by other programs. And I'm thinking in particular, there's a program that the African Disability Forum was working with the International Disability Alliance and Site Savers International. Now, Simon Brown is on the panel, and Simon and I worked together on Inclusion Works. And Inclusion Works was also about getting youth with disabilities into employment. And we worked with governments, we worked with the private sector, large national human resource structures. And then, of course, we also work closely with organizations of persons with disabilities. Now, I'm mentioning this because out of that Inclusion Works project, we learned quite a lot. And we need to share the information. We need to share what we've learned. How did we prepare persons with disabilities for the workplace? And how did we prepare prospective employers to receive people with disabilities in their companies and offices? So a lot of lessons were learned. I mean, preparing youth with soft skills, how to write a CV, how to conduct yourself in an interview so that you maximize your potential and you articulate that clearly. And then what is expected of a company that employs people with disabilities? What is a reasonable accommodation? You know? And all of these kinds of, I wouldn't say barriers, but this kind of information is necessary to share. Now, I know that the global network, Global Disability and Business Network,
Yes, sir.
does share information. But I always get the impression that we're constantly talking to ourselves. We're preaching to the converted. So we need to find a way to get into the mainstream media and get our information out there in the mainstream. And then there was one other point that I wanted to mention, just on when we're sharing information also, and when we're talking amongst ourselves even, is that there is a tendency sometimes to place the burden of unemployment on the person with a disability. Right? So if you look at international instruments like the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the purpose of that, the main objective of that document is for society to change, to adapt to the needs of the person with a disability. So often we say, my body disables me, but society handicaps me.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to remove those barriers.
Yes.
And sometimes in the conversations that I've heard, there seems to be a tendency to focus too much on the individual person with a disability rather than the changes we need to bring about in society, and that means in business and government and in the environment generally.
True. And what you've mentioned, actually, that there are instruments that are already there, especially at the UN level, that help to guide governments, corporates, and even civil society. And one of the best experiences, I would say, as best practice that I've seen in Kenya is that we already also have at least a number to work with, because someone said that if you can't measure it, actually, it becomes very hard even to be accountable. And in Kenya, we have like a provision of 5% of your workforce, at least, to have persons with disability, because through that you are able to innovate so that you can fit and have persons with disability included even to your space and also the workforce. And talking about understanding the needs for the corporates, I want to jump to Simon Brown. I know that you've been working a lot across Africa and even helping us in Kenya shape up and bring up to speed the Kenya Business Disability Network. I would like you probably just to jump in and let the audience understand how important is it to, and as a corporate, let me say, if I'm talking about corporate, then I'm talking about from government all the way to MSMEs, to understand the needs of persons with disabilities. And I want, as we are talking through this, just also mention some of the what we call instruments that have been alluded to by Schweib that help in the understanding of the needs of persons with disabilities. Simon?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Luke. And lovely to be connected back with Schwab again and the history of the Inclusion Works program, because I think that was really important. And as we scale that across Africa, and taking your questions, Luke, my belief is that if we want the system to change, if we want the system to be more inclusive, then we need to be building the capacity and strengthening the system, all of it. Now, it's very clear that there are a large number of employers who want to be more inclusive of people with disabilities in their workforces. It's not a question of convincing them why. It's very much a question of how. That a lot of companies have tried, have struggled, have failed, putting up their hands and saying we need help. And that's a fantastic opportunity. But also that people with disabilities want to be included in workforces. Yeah, there's no difference. Of course, there are particular barriers, but there are equal aspirations as anybody else in society around careers. But there's a gap around what I would call self-confidence and employment readiness. I think this is one of the key learnings from the Inclusion Works program. But also beyond that, where the gaps are then in capacity building functions within the labour market. And that is really key. Yeah, because that is then where the roles of organisations for persons with disabilities engaging with the labour market to build the disability confidence of the labour market, of working perhaps with trade unions around the promotion and protection of rights with people with disabilities in the labour market, but also then the business and disability networks, that finally we get to that. These platforms are incredibly powerful. Swabe is absolutely right. Yeah, but a lot of the members of these platforms of these networks are already the kind of converted, but they're also influencers, and those networks at national levels, of which Sri Lakshmi represents the Ethiopia network, are platforms of knowledge exchange where companies can learn from each other and can begin to then work beyond their core membership in terms of influencing the mainstream. And I think this is really important. But in all of that, it's what I call disability confidence, both in terms around the whole system, including that policy framework. And Luke, you mentioned that you've got to manage what you measure. That's important in terms of the 5% in Kenya, which is often replicated in various parts of Africa in terms of objectives. But then strengthening that policy framework, the rules of the system that not only are punishing exclusion but incentivizing inclusion. What Swabe was talking around reasonable accommodation. How are the policy frameworks supporting companies around the costs of accommodations that go beyond their capacity? And absolutely, Luke, down to MSMEs, down to micro enterprises. They may not be the best members of business and disability networks, but how we reach out to them through chambers of commerce, in the same way as we do through the business and disability networks, is really important, yeah, to build that confidence, because they are also generators of jobs for other people. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. And what comes out clearly from what you are saying is corporates being disability confident, whereby they are not thinking about how they're only thinking about the value chain and how persons with disability contribute to the value chain of the organization and the profitability. And back to Ethiopian Business Disability Network, how in understanding the creating of accessible workplaces, I would like you to talk also about the challenges and opportunities that are there when we're actually looking at employing persons with disabilities. Because, and when you are talking to these, have you had an experience whereby a corporate is saying that probably it dipped in profitability simply because it was trying to be inclusive in its workforce and workspace?
Sure. Sorry, if you could just repeat the last part.
So my question is, in the effort to create accessible workplaces, I would like you to talk about also to include in it challenges and opportunities. And has there been a situation whereby a corporate within your network has complained that its profitability dipped because it was trying to be inclusive in its operations, procedures, or even products and services?
Oh, absolutely. Not so much when it came to products and services, but we did have a company mention to us about having their profit. So they came down to profit when they were trying to measure the productivity of the staff with disabilities that they had in their organization. And that primarily happened because of various reasons, but mostly because some of the issues of these employees with disabilities were not really addressed well within the company. They had no representative take their issues forward, and it was a big lack of communication which led to that problem. And this organization didn't reach out to us either after hiring, the staff. And so there wasn't really anyone who could sort of intervene And that is something that we are now offering as a service through EBDN, where we say if we help you place someone with a disability, or if we refer job seekers for a certain job with one of your companies, if you're hiring, then allow us to also intervene when you face issues. And these issues could be anything. It could be related to reasonable accommodation. It could be attitudinal of, the persons with disabilities themselves. And it could be a simple lack of communication. And sometimes these issues are not as big as where it could lead to a productivity issue with timely intervention had it been done. But in most cases, it comes in only after a lot of time has passed, and in that time, either the person with disability has been fired, or they've left, or there just comes a situation where, like this particular company in Ethiopia, they just went completely silent for over a year without hiring any more persons with disabilities, and we just assume that it's because they're happy with the staff that they have, and so they were, their hiring needs weren't higher or something. So it's really about having effective communication channels. Coming back to the earlier part of your question regarding challenges and opportunities, yes, there are a lot of challenges, and again, in the context to Ethiopia, and also what Simon was saying earlier about SMEs uh, being included in these networks and how they're very important job generators. That is something that we've been focusing on exclusively in the last couple of months. And especially through a recent project with the ILO, we've been trying to reach out to SMEs. And the challenges that we see there is, even if they have the interest to hire persons with disabilities, sometimes they simply cannot afford to do, certain things like an accessibility audit, for instance. It's really important to have an audit done before you hire someone with a disability for safety purposes, to conduct an audit of their factory, for example, even if it's a small one.
Yeah.
It's important to do that, but in Ethiopia, an accessibility audit is very expensive.
Okay.
Similarly, it could be reasonable accommodation.
Okay.
Sometimes the company is small in size, they simply can't afford it. And if you know the economy in Ethiopia, it's been very slow, and so companies don't have the budget, the extra budgets to do all of this. And thankfully, and this is where donors could play a very important role in supporting national business disability networks such as EBDN,
Yeah.
is because of the funding from ILO for this particular project, EBDN has been able to support SMEs in this region in this regard,
Yeah.
where we've been providing free accessibility audits. We've been conducting
Yes.
free audits for these companies. And we're also providing certain reasonable accommodations, like providing the transport fee for job seekers with disabilities for, say, internship. If the company is willing to provide an internship,
I
we're
will,
providing the transport fee and the stipend, etc.
I would like you to
So
hold your
yeah,
thoughts there as I come back
sure.
to my colleague here. And
Yeah.
Schweib, I believe that for every company or corporate, the first customer is an employee. So what are these customer experiences that you think should be put at the workplaces so that persons with disabilities can feel at home? And in that regard, how do we embed assistive technology and the new age assistive technology ideas that are coming on the market to help persons with disability feel at home as first customers of any organization?
Yeah. Well, you're taking me back to a situation where I was a manager and I wanted to employ a visually impaired person.
Yeah.
And obviously, I had to convince my superiors that I'm employing a blind person for a particular job, and it was quite a senior job. and everybody in that office was very negative, you know. They said it's not possible and so on and so on.
Really?
But when we introduced and explained to them simple screen readers and the technology available, you know, using a laptop and all those types of things for blind people, it takes a while, you know, for it to sit in.
Yeah.
But the competence of the person, to a large extent, overwhelms that negativity and prejudice that people with disabilities may feel in the workplace. But today, the technology, I was so fascinated when I saw there's a company here from India and the technology that they have that I've not seen before. So there's all kinds of opportunities now. There's just nothing that stops the workplace, given the technology and the advances we are making, from employing people with disabilities and having those people feel comfortable in their workspace and creating a reasonably accessible environment and an inclusive environment. And in my own experience, I have to say that once you're in a workspace with a person with a disability, if you're in a workspace with people with the majority are not people with they're non-disabled people, it takes a while, but after a while they don't see you. They don't see the disability anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Simon, and you have like, I think, 1 minute just to answer to this question. What does the future hold? That's number one. And number two, is disability straitjacketed, or as corporates should be thinking about disaggregation within disability, like the provisions that you'll have for the deaf are not the same that you'll have for visually impaired persons. How does it look like, and what does the future hold in the space of business disability network in Africa and probably across the world?
Okay.
It's a minute.
Okay, cool. Let me try in 1 minute. I think the future is very positive. I think we get to a point where we begin to see the system changing, and I think this is very important in Kenya, but also in many other countries around the business and disability networks, and the growing membership of those networks and the growing number of networks. That's really important. It means the private sector is and the corporate sector is very, very interested in disability and greater inclusion. In terms of the second part of that question, should we be disaggregating? I think we should, not necessarily around visual and hearing and physical impairments, but looking at more marginalized groups, people who are intellectually impaired, people who have psychosocial impairments, so often to mental health conditions, people who are deaf and blind. These are groups of people with disabilities who are even more marginalized than the rest of the community. And we need to be taking that very seriously to understand what are the accommodations we need to make for those groups so that they can participate equally with everybody else. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. I will want to take 2 questions from the audience. Just 2 questions, brief questions. 2 brief questions from the audience. Mic around. Anyone raise your hand? I can see 1 hand there for Prof.
Thank you very much. This question may be answered by Simon and or Swaib. What was the methodology for the Inclusive Work Project, and what are the highlights? What can we say these are our best practice? What is our successes in Inclusive Work Project?
Let me try and answer that, Swaib. Technically, it was called something called market system development. So looking, and some people might know it as markets for the poor, as a generic term. But this looks at a whole system, looking at not just the core of the system, so the demand for labor and the supply of labor, but also the supporting functions of the system, organizations of persons with disability, trade unions, business and disability networks, employer federations, and so on, and then the regulatory framework. Yeah, the mechanism for both holding the system to account, but also incentivizing it. And that was really important, because if we only look at the demand and the supply side, we will not address what I call that missing middle of incentivizing and building the capacity of the system to be more inclusive.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that answer. I believe it's satisfactory, Prof. Next question. I have.
There's somebody saying time's up.
There is a hand here, and I think I will extend to one more question, then let's them through. Okay, fine. Let's just have one question here, then I think we wind up. Thank you.
So this one goes to Shaib. Where is the place for evidence around disability and employment vis-a-vis people working on disability and employment and have as projects and having disabled people employed within the organization to show that actually it works? Where is the place for showing evidence that employing person with disability works for people working on employment as projects and having not to employ persons with disability? Where is the place for evidence?
The evidence between employment and unemployment of people with disabilities.
No. My question is, how do we show evidence that actually employing person with disability works?
Okay.
That person with disability can work.
Okay.
And we have massive projects around disability and employment, but we don't see disabled people represented in those projects as employees. Where do we get the evidence? Like just from you as Shaib, working within disability issues and projects.
Okay. Yeah. So basically we need to look, your question is around evidence that employment actually works for people with disabilities. Right? I think if I take the South African example, right, where the organization, the National Federation of People with Disabilities, their argument has always been, work is dignity. Right? Every person with a disability wants a job. Right? And the government had the same 5% of your workforce should be people with disabilities, the same quota system.
Yeah.
The quota system doesn't always work, as everybody knows. But here's the difference in the South African scenario. Companies actually went out to actively recruit people with disabilities. They went to the National Council on Persons with Disabilities, Council for the Blind, the Deaf. They had interim training centers that prepared people for the workplace. They made an effort to make the workplace accessible. And that argument from the people with disabilities that they actually want jobs, they want to be taxpayers, not the recipients of welfare and charity, that for me is where the argument is strongest. When people with disabilities, when they emphasize they want that job and it works for them.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for answering that question. And I would like to thank my panelists, Shaib, my panelists from Ethiopian Business Disability Network, Simon Brown. Thank you so much. And please, a round of applause for them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.